Okay, hello, and thank you for coming to this session on shared citations proposal. I will put in the chat, and you can follow along before or afterwards, the links to this particular session, to this proposal. And the slides themselves are also available. Here we go, here in the chat. The slides are also available in that meta page. This presentation is a proposal. It is not a formally agreed to project of the Wikimedia Foundation or anyone else. You will see hopefully in my description why I believe it to be a Wikimedia Foundation project, in the sense of I don't think anyone else has the ability to do so, even if they had the money and the time and the technical capacity. I think it's an in-house project. It is not approved by anyone. It is just my proposal. And so with those caveats, I'll begin. Shared Citations sits quite similarly to something that Amir presented yesterday about global templates. This is a kind of infrastructure that would sit among and between Wikimedia Foundation's sister projects. It is not a sister project in its own right. Mark, if you could mute yourself, I can hear shuffling around in the background. Thanks very much. So to that end, I will run through some of the descriptive parts quickly. You can find these on the meta page, which I described before. The problems we have in this space is that citations are very important to the Wikimedia movement. This is crucial to how we operate. It is crucial to how Wikimedia defines its objectivity, or at least the way it differentiates itself from where our values come from, is that we cite our sources. We refer to reliable third-party activities. We do not own the truth on Wikipedia articles or Wikidata items, etc. They are crucial for the editor and crucial for the reader, but what we're trying to do is make it easier for both. Currently, it is an entirely manual process, an entirely duplicated process every single time you wish to make a new one. That is, our inline texts for adding footnotes are high maintenance, and this goes equally for Wikidata as well as all of the Wikipedia, Wikisource, Wikibooks. I will emphasize Wikipedia and Wikidata, and you can infer the different methods, which are the same effectively, but different templates and different structures on, say, Wikiquote under that category. They are high in maintenance, high in technical complexity, highly duplicative, and maintained by repetitive manual effort, and with highly specified bots to do updates of templates and running around checking and structuring things. This is why this is not called structured citations as a proposal, but shared citations. Our footnotes, our citations are highly structured already, just very diversely structured. This is an example which we're all familiar with. This is the opening paragraph of an article, Wikipedia article I wrote, that happens to have 13 footnotes in it because it's a very broad topic. And the code behind that, the way we store that information, is a mess. We're just used to it. This really shouldn't be the way we deal and the way that we handle a crucial part of our infrastructure in the 21st century, to handle all of the metadata fields for citations raw, in line, in the code of a Wikipedia article or Wikidata item. Again, you are familiar with this. This is how a standard Wikipedia footnote looks like. This happens to be the most reused footnote across Wikipedia, used millions of times, and we have to type out all of this information every single time. It is therefore very fragile if someone retypes it incorrectly, and therefore it's impossible to tell if we have false positives or false negatives when we're trying to account, or count, let alone account, for the number of times an individual source is recited. Similarly, Wikidata items, the same item will be repeated, the same reference will be repeated multiple times in the same item. We have various methods of trying to handle this across Wikimedia projects. CiteQ is referenced in this conference a few times. It's an attempt to use Wikidata items that are about individual sources as the source for all the metadata information to put into a Wikidata item. This is very important. This is the state of the art inside Wikimedia projects, but it does have one crucial limitation. It requires the source itself to be a Wikidata item. That doesn't hold when we're talking about an individual web page or an individual newspaper article from 1832 or whatever. Wikidata's scope probably doesn't, although it technically could, and we can argue about that, include the scope of everything that Wikipedia can use as a footnote. Therefore, the shared citations proposal is, and I emphasize this, entirely agnostic as to the scope of Wikidata. It is proposing a separate database for whose scope is entirely things which are referenced in Wikimedia projects, no more than. It is not like Commons in the sense that
Liam, I can't hear you. I think we lost your sound.
you know. Yes, I see yeses in the comments. So as I was saying, the scope of Wikidata, the scope of shared citations is very crucially limited to the scope of things which are used as footnotes in Wikimedia projects, including Wikidata. Wikidata itself, and what many people understand to be WikiCite, is potentially all the things, and that's fine. This is shared citations is a service project. It is not a new Crossref or a new Google Scholar. It is just behind the scenes to support the footnotes and the references used in Wikimedia projects, not preloaded with all sorts of things that can be cited. Andra from GeneWiki refers to that kind of preloading as stamp collecting. That is, trying to catch them all, trying to get a full set. Shared citations is pragmatic in its scope, not trying to have everything. I will skip over, we discussed, we reuse citations a lot, but we retype them a lot. This is the example I referenced before, in the full text. We've used this approximately to almost 3 million times. This requires more than a gigabyte's worth of text stored in our data set, in our corpus, just to refer to the one journal article. I think for the purposes of this conference, I will skip over the ways this can be useful to Wikimedians and readers. I think this audience will understand that, and the various types of groups, power users, first-time editors, translators of Wikipedia articles. You can see this information. I will skip through it. You can read it in greater detail on the meta page, both for the readers and the writers of Wikipedia, broadly defined. Researchers, reusers of high data sets, individual librarians, so forth. I will also skip through this section. Our, in this context, refers to the Wikimedia Foundation, because I believe this is a project that can only be developed by the Wikimedia Foundation, because the difficulty is not in creating a new database, a Wikibase, for example. Doesn't have to be a Wikibase, any database will do, but the difficulty is not in creating and filling a database. The difficulty in this project, is the software integration. It is the monitoring and editing software between the different wikis of the Wikimedia universe. That is, if you are storing a footnote and the metadata of that reference in one place, and you change it in one place, that change has to be propagated out to the various wikis that use that footnote. Moreover, the watch lists of the various wiki pages that use that footnote have to be notified. And furthermore, where this should really work is not that all Wikipedians have to go to a new structured data set to change a thing and then come back to Wikipedia. This is one of the criticisms or frustrations we have seen as Wikidata users in encouraging more Wikipedians to edit Wikidata. It's fair enough that we don't require people to leave their home wiki to come to Wikidata or a new citation database to make a change to, say, an info box and then come back home again. We need to allow people to edit this structured information where they already are. Consequently, we need the infrastructure of MediaWiki and Wikibase to allow for editing here, changes there in the center, and propagation back out. This is a technical challenge. It is equivalent, analogous to the Wikidata bridge, where you can edit a Wikipedia info box on your home language edition that changes something over there on Wikidata and propagates to anywhere else that is using that same statement as a field in their info box. We know this is a challenge, but it is not an insurmountable challenge. Nonetheless, this is why shared citations is not a project that can necessarily be taken on by third-party developers. It requires the integration into MediaWiki core. It also requires the dependency engine is a phrase I think it's Daniel Kinsler refers to, the dependency engine, the idea that I make a change here and that propagates to multiple other places, and various databases and various APIs need to be called and monitored, informed to send that change elsewhere. Questions like what happens if one language edition that uses this same footnote, that article is semi-protected? Should the change automatically be propagated through or not? As an example, what if the editor who made the change on Wiki X is blocked on Wiki Y? Should that change be allowed to go through? Another practical editing question. These are almost political questions that need to be discussed. It is not simply a matter of make a new data set. This is what I've been referring to, the two main community concerns, question of how to monitor and how to edit here without leaving to go over there. I've referred to this being granular, and I've talked about how it being arbitrary, and I've talked about how it being cascading. And if you have questions about this, please ask in the comments, but I have mentioned these not necessarily by name, that we are talking about changing to an individual element of a footnote, not changing the entire Wikipedia article. There are various editing principles required in this that you should not have to be able to leave your wiki, but legacy editing environments shouldn't be disadvantaged by doing so. You can't necessarily do all the fancy things in old school MediaWiki pages, but those people should not suddenly have no footnotes available for them to see. Things like just being able to click a little, I don't know, a little chain icon to go over where you are looking is important. Finally, I will get to a couple of examples here. This is just a proof of concept. This is not me necessarily pointing about how it should look, but the idea here is that the citation database I've referred to, C item arbitrary number here, has an author string, has a first name, last name string, and has a Wikidata number for that author. Importantly, that Wikidata number does not have to be blue. It could be a red link. There could be no author for that person, and that's fine. That is something that is a limitation of the CiteQ template. You can only reference something that exists already in Wikidata. I refer here to sitelinks, which is my little joke on the idea of sitelinks with an S in English. This is sitelinks with a C in English, where you can say, this work is referenced X number of times, and a few of those have been removed in the past. That's important to track. The first time it was added to any Wikimedia project, it was on this person, by this name, by this time on this article. And it is used in these various wikis, page number this or chapter number that is used in various places. We've discussed in WikiCite how to define a work, at the book level, the edition level. That kind of bibliographic metadata structure is something we enjoy debating, and I'm not necessarily trying to give the answer here, but my proposal groups the works under the citation under an individual work, and then if you are referencing an individual page or an individual chapter or an individual page range, that is clarified in the code of your footnote, and they all go back to the one place here. You would have a different citation item if it was a different edition of that work, because it might have a different pagination. Here is an example of how we would track disinformation. This is a journal article that has a publication status field, retracted, which allows you to then check and monitor, is this work being added to any other Wikipedia article in the future? You could run bots for this to say, hang on, check, make sure that this work, or indeed any other work by this author, is not being re-added to a Wikipedia article, to track for disinformation across wiki projects. We do this already in individual language editions, but smaller language editions are much more susceptible to disinformation campaigns because the monitoring required is quite hard to do. This would centralize that work. This particular example is a journal article. This is the Vaccines Give You Autism journal article that has been thoroughly debunked, but it would be necessary to keep it in the data set to make sure it is trackable, its non-use is trackable over the time. Equally, you can see here I provided some examples of how you might reference different ways of providing access to users to the full text, even if it is a copyrighted work. A shadow library like Sci-Hub, the Internet Archive, a closed access academic repository. They're all valid external links. We don't have to keep that full text ourselves. Wikisource could also be a valid link here. Finally, in this example, I talk about how the author string or the publication location, the newspaper article, doesn't have to have a Wikidata item or a Wikipedia article. It can be a red link, and that's okay. We can make sure that's the pragmatic scope of this database, separate from the agnosticism about what should or should not be in Wikidata. Another example proof use case I've included here is lookup of how many other places has this publication been cited across Wikipedia, or how many other places has this author been cited across Wikidata. Maybe that is a red link campaign like Women in Red. We found all of the most popular newspapers that don't have a Wikidata item. That would be worthwhile creating as a blue link. Finally, this is how, for example, not pretending this is the case, the formal case, such a citation might look in Wikimedia code. It looks very similar to a cite Q reference, the difference being that you could potentially add a styling field if your language Wikipedia prefers to do Harvard style, or your individual article prefers to do APA style of showing how a footnote looks. Fine, style it differently. The information, the metadata, can be housed separately from how it happens to display on a Wikipedia article. At least in the English Wikipedia, we refer to this as cite var, citation variation. No particular citation style is preferred over any other. And this allows us, for the first time, to disaggregate the display method from the content in the footnote. So if you want to display it in your own personal way, great. You can put a user script on top of everything yourself and change the entire Wikipedia to display that in a way that you like. That kind of agnosticism of content versus display, form and function, we've never been able to do before because we code everything manually. And I add in here the locally stored Wikitext, the lorem ipsum, contextual information that might only need to live in a Wikipedia article should not be stored centrally. and that is fine too. Contextual information in a footnote is often required. Crucially, for the Wikidata perspective, I'll stop here and go to questions. Crucially, for the Wikidata perspective, since we're in a Wikidata conference, the citation database that I'm describing does not necessarily have to be a Wikibase. I think it is a logical consequence. It could be a Wikibase, but there's nothing in this that mandates that. It is not a sister project. It is not a competition to Wikidata. It is a service project to Wikimedia projects behind the scenes, aggregating the information that would support also Wikidata. So all of the references that we add into statements across Wikidata don't have to be added every single time to 25 statements in the same Wikidata item, which bloats the data set. And you can see different comparisons here of what is valid, at least in the current understanding of the scope of a Wikidata item, as opposed to the scope of a shared citations item. I propose that this would possibly take about 3 years to build properly and about 10 people to do so. Nonetheless, it requires a lot of collaborative work across different teams in the Wikimedia Foundation and Wikimedia Deutschland, and of course, community. I propose a rollout schedule that would start with things like the incubator wiki, where creating citation templates is one of the hardest parts of a new language edition. One of the scope requirements here is that a language edition of a Wikipedia or whatever would have to request to join the project rather than the project being mandated upon them. And of course, it doesn't deprecate any existing citation style. You could still use the old school existing footnotes if you wish. Nothing about this deprecates that methodology. I think that's enough of me talking. Does anyone have any questions?
Liam, we have questions in the Etherpad. Do you want me to read them out to you?
If you please, yes. And
okay,
how much time do you have remaining? I tried to speak fast, but it's
we have
large topic,
4 minutes,
small time.
So, yeah. If there is a reference to a book that has an ISBN, ISSN number, then that book structural information, the metadata already exists in a different database. In such cases, do we take that data and put it into the shared citations project, or will we use an external identifier and link to that in an external source?
Let me just reshare what I would describe as the relevant slide. Again, this is, I think it's crucial that this is a proposal open for comment and modification, not the formally defined, this is the way it must be. I would describe, let me find the example here. I would say all the relevant metadata fields should be included in the citation database, and external links to where a field should be, where is this citation also included. We have that as the external identifiers properties in Wikidata. But the idea here is that you could potentially, you could put in any metadata fields that you wish to display or wish to be useful in the citation database. Sometimes we know where ISBNs are misprinted or are reused. So we don't want to, we want to capture that information. And we also, for database rights, for independence purposes, Wikimedia does not like, as we all know, hot linking out and sucking in information from third-party datasets in case those third-party datasets decide to turn themselves off or change or link rot. Everything that we display in a Wikipedia article should be under Wikimedia's control.
Thanks for that, Liam. We've got quite a few questions and we're clearly not going to get through them all. So I'm just going to pick one that I think might be quick and easy to answer. And that is what proportion number of the citations are only used once? And the question does note that we probably don't know that and asks if anyone is doing the research.
That is precisely the problem. Part of the difficulty in this proposal is we don't know the scope of Wikimedia citations. Various organizations have done work on this, including Open Citations based out of the University of Bologna. And there have been academic studies to try and look into this kind of work. But the fact that everything is done manually means that we cannot currently even relatively scientifically state what is the histogram of reuse of an individual citation or its change over time. It's a very expensive piece of work that also the Internet Archive does this. It scrapes out, it looks for new ISBNs being added, new URLs being added, but we do not track where something is reused. Based on the statistics of the number of unique Wikipedia articles that have Wikidata items, we know that the overlap of subjects is quite low relatively for Wikipedia purposes. There are, like everything, there's a small number of highly reused sources, and then there is a long tail of single-use sources. Part of the question this would help solve, it was João from Wikimedia Movimento Brazil who phrased this to me. I love the idea of epistemological decolonization. That is, we don't know how much of our own language Wikipedia is citing sources published by other countries, notably by colonial countries. We would like to be able to categorize, to calculate how many of our own sources in our language edition about our country's history or our language's history are written in our country or in our own language. This would at least let you monitor that, and then you could track it over time. We have that for Women in Red in terms of English Wikipedia or any Wikipedia category divided by gender of that biography. We don't have that for footnotes.
Thanks, Liam.
Only once you can track it can you then try and shift it.
Thanks for your answer, and sorry to cut you off there. We're bang out of time, and we've got some more questions in the Etherpad. I don't know whether you'd be generous enough to go in and try and address them.
Yes.
Brill. Thank you very much for that talk. It's really interesting, and I think I speak for everyone when we say we'll watch this space and see what develops, and hopefully it will be positive and we'll get this off the ground over the coming months and years. So thanks, Liam.